So instead of me pivoting to Asia, I'm going to pivot to the audience because we've got about, I think, 25 minutes and we'd like to get as many questions from you as possible. So please feel free to put your hands up and I will direct Admiral Rajavan.
My question is, why is it so important for the United States to have the TPP? I understand that you have an adverse balance of trade with China amounting to 350 billion a year. And apart from denying China that advantage, what exactly does the United States stand to gain from having the TPP rather than having this open system that Shivshankar was talking about? Because I fear that, as he says, will India be part of the collateral damage in the TPP?
I've struggled to understand, to explain what constitutes the next level on Indo-U.S. relations. I can explain it. I can visualize India-Japan, India-China. I think Shankar has actually articulated it better than anybody else. And the real issue is that in politics, especially after Iran-U.S. new equilibrium, it's really an economic thing where the lack of progress is very palpable, especially on Main Street, I would say Main Street relations. Wall Street has done well, even IT, it's a lot driven by finance. So you mentioned, and every time you talk to people, the two things you hear from the US are IPR and trade, getting the game up. I would like to say that it's actually the other way. The debate within the US on both of these issues is actually more and more consistent with some of the complaints against India. Once you go beyond the hijacking of the dialogue on the pharmaceutical issue by one company. You know, if you take the bigger issue of other services, knowledge-based services, IT, etc., which is the greater potential, India and on IPR and others, the debates that are happening in the US have a great deal of thing for India. So how do we get that dialogue reframed and going forward? Because I think that is absolutely critical. Similarly on trade, actually it's the elaboration of this question, so I won't elaborate anymore myself.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to continue on the trade issue. The Indo-U.S. trade is about $100 billion often talked about, and we go to 500 billion is a sort of interesting figure that came out a couple of months ago. But in reality, it's at best sluggish. The trade and merchandise for the last 3 years has grown. It's 8%, down to 1%, up 4%, and this year, the first 3 quarters is only 3%. Do you think that will start pressurizing this relationship, or the fact that we are $13 billion in sort of defense sales and our sailors on each other's aircraft carriers now and submarines, etc., is good enough to carry on this for the next few years? Thanks.
I have a different sense of both the motivation and the prospects of TPP, and they are more favorable than your questions suggested you feel about them. It starts, I think, with frustration on the part not just of the president, but many in the United States, that the World Trading Order was in considerable jeopardy, or at least stalled out. WTO was the bloom was very much off the rose. So the concept, as it emerged in Washington and in other capitals where the United States did a lot of consultation, was to have a Pacific dimension and an Atlantic dimension. And in the Atlantic dimension obviously being TTIP. And nobody from the president on down, and certainly Mike Froman and others, have made very clear that TPP is not a closed club. It's an open process. And it's not just eyewash, I think, when the president and others say that they would hope that China would be part of it one day. But there are genuine, I would even say objective, issues having to do with standards and practices that hold that off for the time being. By the way, there is a definite hope that India might, in due course, be part of TPP, just as it might be part of APEC, and that as the two, if the two pacts can, in both cases, not just be negotiated, but also be approved by our barely functional Congress, that would create a kind of new momentum that would rescue an international trade order that is now in some jeopardy.
Well, I only have one comment, which is in relation to the intellectual property disputes, and I'm no expert in this area, so I tread carefully, but I don't think it's correct, at least from an American perspective, to restrict this to big pharma fighting your generic drug companies. I mean, there's definitely, that's part of it, but I'll just give you one example that's well outside the sphere of pharmaceuticals, and that's in terms of military technology. India wants access to American military technology. Much of the stuff that India wants is privately owned, and you will not be able to get it even if the administration says it's okay with them, if there aren't better protections for intellectual property in this country.
You're taking a pass on this one.
I think we've all said what we had to.
I'll just say, when we talk about next level, we tend to look up. Let's also look kind of at different levels. And I suspect what we'll see also over the next few years is kind of state-to-state level cooperation, city-level cooperation. You know, people sit throughout people-to-people ties, but playing out in very different dimensions, including just sheer number of students. I wouldn't be surprised we see the level of interest of American students wanting to come here to learn more about India, and they see it, as many do, as the bright spot and see it as part of the future. So I think that's where you'll see, and potentially kind of moving across legislative dialogues, understanding how the other systems in politics, two democracies understanding each other beyond the executive branches as well, and not just one or two congressional delegations or an MP's delegation, but a consistent annual dialogue, one such thing. What we've seen also just on the next level side is kind of the institutionalization that Strobe mentioned, not just kind of presidential level, but today really at every, I'm sure the embassies in both countries are tired of just the visiting delegations, but it's not just, they're actually, it's interesting to actually, if you should go out and look at the joint statements, but they do actually show how much, that it's not just the next big thing, but where not just the good stuff, but even some of the difficult issues I think that everybody's asked about and panelists have talked about can be resolved. And so that they actually lead to solutions and not just everybody feeling good about having kind of aired them out. We go to our next round of questions. Gentleman over here.
Working. I wanted to get my respond to this issue of getting one's head around what occurred in California or what occurred on 9/11. It struck me listening to you and earlier that if one used phrases like seeking salvation or seeking self-actualization, you would get some glimmer of the motivations of the people who did this. Second, from what we've seen here in South Asia, the Elam struggle, the suicide bombings, it is not confined only to Muslims. And thirdly, in my view, seeing the Holocausts around the world and even in South Asia in recent times and around the rest of the world, there is, for us, a sense that there is a grossly disproportionate response to what has occurred in California. There are undoubted reasons for distress on what has happened. But if you look at what other countries have gone through, particularly India, from the time that the Khalistani killings started, we've got used to, we've been able to, shall we say, cope with, experienced, whether in the Nazi atrocities, in what happened in Mao's China, Stalin's Gulag, notwithstanding not forgetting the modern North Korean dictatorship or elsewhere. I think while the American people have not had attacks like this on their homeland, the notion that you can ignore this and the, if you like, the hubris of not engaging with the sources of this alienation. Yeah, okay. And so one sees floundering. Yeah, one sees floundering and people who have lost their way. It's a comment rather than a question.
So if all of you could please keep your comments and questions short, because we'd like to get to as many of you as possible. Mr. Naqvi is next.
To revert to the earlier theme, the Russians are in Syria. Who are they fighting? One, the Houthis and the Saudis are talking in ceasefire has taken place. Houthis and the Saudis are talking in Yemen. A new president is being elected in Lebanon, who is to the liking of Damascus, and everyone is more or less agreed that Assad remains while for the transition. So, therefore, such major changes cannot take place without the superpower being involved. So, are we to understand that there is an understanding between the Americans and the Russians on all that is going on?
Ambassador Sajjan.
Yes, thank you. I would like to refer to what Ambassador Menon said, that India and Indonesia, or maybe it was Strobe, that these have not been, yeah, you had mentioned Strobe, yes, that these have not been ripe grounds for, I think that is what Ambassador Menon had said, that it is the people here have not been ready to embrace the ideology of ISIS. And what happened in Paris, what happened in California, we've seen that that means there was something in that particular society that the ideology of ISIS did take root, was attractive for those people. Now, I can understand that the first response of the French government was to go and start bombing ISIS in Raqqa and Syria. But is there, do you think, is there an introspection in those communities or those countries that we also need to do something to, let us say, integrate the communities better in our own system? Thank you.
One question on this side, and we'll go back to the panel.
As someone who's served for just a year and a half on India's Parliamentary Standing Committee on External Affairs, I'd like to see more exchanges between our legislatures. But the question that I would like to ask this panel is really about China's One Belt, One Road initiative. How should India and the United States respond to this very bold initiative? We had an interesting moment in Parliament, in our barely functional Parliament yesterday, when the External Affairs Minister, Sushma Swaraj, made a statement on her recent visit to Islamabad. And during the half an hour that Parliament functioned, I asked for a clarification. I asked her a question. She had expressed the hope that in time there would be transit through Pakistan between India and Afghanistan in her statement. And I asked her what would be her response to the president of China's visit to Pakistan in April 2015 and the decision to build roads. Initially, that would have come through the western provinces, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Baluchistan, but we now hear of an eastern alignment coming towards sort of Lahore. Even though I asked her that question, I mean, she simply welcomed my support for the resumption of the comprehensive bilateral dialogue, but did not really give an answer to how we should respond to this major initiative by China to build new kinds of infrastructure in and through Pakistan. And given the expertise on this panel, I thought it would be interesting to hear a bit of both the Indian and the US perspective on China's new initiative.
I would suggest Ambassador Menon start, and then we'll get back to the questions towards India's west.
Got it. On One Belt, One Road, my own attitude, I don't know what government thinks, but my own attitude is that a road, a pipeline, this is infrastructure. Anybody can use it. It's the use that you choose to put it to that gives it, strategic, political, other kinds of significance. This is true of ports, this is true of... So I think One Belt, One Road is almost a fact. It's going to be a fact. Let's deal with it. As India, I would say go out and use it. Now, the counter-argument is immediately, but the Chinese are building roads through POK, through Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, and how can we accept that? How can we use it? You reserve your position, do what you need to legally, use infrastructure that's available to you. And who built it is frankly quite irrelevant to the actual purpose to which you put it. So for me, the calculation should be, is it in India's interest? Does some of this infrastructure help us to achieve our goals? If it does, go out and use it. I think it's going to be a fact. One belt, one road, both the belt and the road. In fact, what you're watching is really the consolidation of the Eurasian landmass, increasingly. I mean, if you look at trade today, what was it? Someone said 12 years ago, only two of China's neighbors had China as their biggest trading partner. Today, every single one has China not just as their biggest trading partner. In some cases, like Kazakhstan, it's way beyond 50% of their foreign trade. Now, so it's not just trade, it's payment arrangements, whether it's the AIIB now, the use of the renminbi, almost 30%, I think, of China's foreign trade now is settled in renminbi. So it's a series of things. I don't think that there's any point sitting in the corner, sucking your thumb and complaining and whining to yourself. It's going to be a fact, go out and use it. That would be my attitude to it. But, governments work in complicated ways, so let's see.
Strobe.
On the question of Russia's gambit, motive, I think it breaks down as follows. Number one, Putin is absolutely committed to maintaining a regime that has been an ally of the USSR, if you remember those initials from once upon a time, and an ally of Russia. Assad is a client and an ally. He is particularly determined that Assad will not be brought down in yet another Western/US instigated regime change. It's one reason that he went back into the presidency and threw Medvedev out of the presidency. The problem, of course, which I think Martin has already basically pointed to, is that not only is Russia in there trying to save a regime and a leader that has cooked his own goose, if I can put it that way, who has so grotesquely slaughtered his own people that there's no way he can stay in power. But Russia can keep him in power longer, which will, of course, have the effect of not only stoking the carnage in Syria, but also stoking the chaos that ISIS thrives on. The last point, well, and keep in mind that Putin and Russia have put together, insofar as it's a coalition that has only one other state, and that is Iran, which of course is a Shia state, and a movement, Hezbollah, to keep in place a Shia regime, the Alawites. And Martin made it very clear that there is no solution to this problem unless it has a Shia component. But just one last point, a Sunni component. Speaking of Sunnis, there are a whole lot of Sunnis who are citizens of the Russian Federation. It's a minority. It might be, and we're talking about kind of cultural Islamic background, but mostly Sunni. But they occupy something close to a quarter of the territory of the largest nation on earth in terms of territory. And I think that one of the knockoff effects of what Putin is doing in Syria is going to play back into the Soviet Union. There are already, and this comes from Russian sources, thousands and thousands of Russian citizens who have gone over to ISIS, and there has been an inflow of militants from the Middle East who have gone into the Caucasus and other parts of Russia. He is going to pay a terrible price for this. And so are all of us if he does not accept the argument that Secretary Kerry is making on a daily basis, almost literally, to Lavrov, that Russia should see it in its own interests to make its priority bringing a transition to the Syrian government and ending the war rather than keeping Assad in place.
Martin?
I would just on that front, I think Strobe has put it very well. I would just caution against selecting dots and joining them up and declaring as a result a new day dawning in the Middle East. I think that will mislead us to a point of kind of wishful thinking in a very dire situation. Yes, there is an attempt to resolve the Yemen conflict so the Saudis can get their forces out of there and focus on where we would like them to focus, which is against ISIS. But I do not believe that will actually occur, that there'll be a political resolution there. And I won't go into the details of the Yemen conflict, but I just think that definitely it's worth trying, and we are certainly supporting it as strongly as possible, but I do not think that the circumstances are ripe for that. Secondly, Lebanon, yes, so they finally have a president, but I would not exaggerate the importance of that. Lebanon is the weakest player, and the president is the weakest of the politicians, and it doesn't reflect anything but a desire not to see Lebanon descend into hell. So that's a good thing, but it doesn't have broader implications in my view. The real game is the one that Strobe referred to, which is the effort by Secretary of State Kerry in particular, working on Lavrov and Putin, to try to separate them from Assad as one of the keys to creating a better environment for dealing with the challenge from ISIS. And the only way that he can succeed in that, in my view, is if he has an answer to Putin's concern, fundamental concern, which is not about Assad, but about what happens the moment after Assad goes. Because there the problem of collapsing institutions and failed states, which provides the opportunity for ISIS to expand its caliphate, is the thing that Putin fears most, and that we need to develop an answer to. And so we come back again to all of the challenges and dilemmas that I described before. One last point, which is in reference to your point. So first of all, I'd just like to remind everybody, we're in a kind of silly season in the United States where primary politics necessarily drives the politicians who are running for president to the extreme, and the Republicans have to move to the right, particularly in the case of Iowa. And so we shouldn't take even the most extreme statements of the most extreme candidates like Donald Trump too seriously. The poll number that people like to cite is the poll number that says that, whether it's 27% or 31% of Republican likely voters in the primary are going to vote for Trump, and that makes him a front runner. But the poll number that we should really focus on in the context of your point is the poll number that says 67% of Americans reject Trump's idea of putting a ban on Muslim immigrants to the United States. And that underscores for me the basic common sense of the American people, and that we shouldn't give up on them just yet.
We had hoped to get to another round of questions. Unfortunately, we are not just out of time, we are over time. So I hope you'll come to our panelists later and ask them your questions. But I'd like to thank you all. And before we wrap up, I'd like to not quite turn the mic over, but hand the podium over, not even that, to Strobe, who's going to say a few final words.
Vikram's partner, fellow leader of Brookings India since its inception. We have many definitions of impact. Our motto at Brookings is quality, independence, and impact. And one way we have impact is when our scholars go into high public positions. He's on his way to the INF. Brookings Delhi or Brookings India, it's a loss for them, but for us at Brookings DC, it's going to be great to have him not just in the neighborhood, but participating as much as possible in our work there. And Shubir, thank you so much for all that you've done for this startup, which is now a scale-up. So all the best.
Thank you all so much. And thank you to the panelists. And please do come back to Brookings India events. And you can, for those of you on Twitter, follow them at Brookings India.